Hello, and welcome to the Proactive Caregiving Podcast. As a CPA with over 20 years as an industry accountant, Jessica stepped away from the corporate world to become a full-time caregiver for her mother. Having learned invaluable lessons along the way, she is now here to share those with you and to invite you to join her on this caregiver's journey. Here is your host, Jessica Cannon.
Hi, everybody. Did you know that this year is the Chinese year of the rat in their zodiac? Shock, shock, maybe. But I personally would say this is the year of the nurse. I'm here today with Ramona Good. I wanted to have her on today to, as usual, explain share my experience, but also give you, the caregiver, a voice. And with everything that's going on right now, I thought this was perfect timing to have Ramona on. Ramona is LVN. She has her license in Calm, and she's an administrator for an assisted living. Now, one of the main reasons I wanted to have her on was because a lot of the caregivers I'm coming into contact with now, and the questions that seem to come up is, how do I know when it's time? So, without further ado, good morning, Ramona. Thanks for coming on.
Good morning. No, it's my pleasure.
So, one of the things that caregivers seem to be panicked, and of course at this point, it's, if we have to think of this as pre-COVID times, caregivers that I would come into contact with and have incredible conversations with, we all come to this point in time where we have this question of, how do I know when it's time? You know, for me personally, I felt like I can do as much as I intend to do, and as much as I encourage myself to do, or as much as I want to do, but there still comes that point in time where I physically can't do it, or I emotionally can't do it, or I don't have the knowledge to know how to do this going forward. So when you have caregivers that come in and they visit you in a facility to say, how do I know when it's time? What would you tell them?
Well, here's the thing. It's all very relative to situation. But I always give the story. I don't know if I've ever told you this story. Then there's that one day. And I think you just wake up and you just know. One of the main markers is when you start to go from feeling like this is my parent to this is my child. When there starts to be a little bit of resentment. If it starts to feel overwhelming for you. Or even if there's a moment where you're like, I think I'm not giving the care that they really need. And I always really urge people not to wait too long, because there's always I see these stories all the time. I thought we were fine, and then this happened, and it was catastrophic, and it just changed us. So while I do think it's situational, and it is completely based on your own personal experience and what you can handle, I think a lot of people do take it on for longer than they should, out of feelings of obligation or guilt. And really, there are some things when you're dealing with someone who either has dementia or Alzheimer's, or just a loved one who needs extra care, you 9 times out of 10 are not giving them the care that they really need, because it's more than you're qualified to give, even if you are a healthcare professional. It's a different level of care when you're taking care of somebody you love. It's harder.
I would agree with that 100%. It is definitely harder. So when you're making that decision and you finally wake up that morning, or the event takes place, one of the questions I came up with in my process was, what is the difference between assisted living and memory care assisted?
Well, memory care is focused solely on individuals who have either dementia or Alzheimer's or some form of cognitive deficit. So there's a lot more care that goes into taking care of the individuals in memory care. assisted living is usually just for exactly what it sounds like. People who need help with medication administration, or people who can't get around as great, or people who just need subtle reminders, or who just are just suffering from old age and the children can't take care of them anymore. Memory care, there's definitely a higher level of care. We focus a lot on keeping our residents as independent as possible. I'm a strong believer in everything you do for someone is something you're taking away from them. We try to keep them as independent as possible. We try to focus on their own individual personal needs because the dementia journey is very personal. While memory care is considered assisted living right now, I'm almost positive that very shortly memory care is going to be put in its own category, aside from assisted living and skilled, because it is a definite different level of care.
I agree. And I think that's, I'm glad you were able to clarify that, because when I eventually started to go look at facilities to get, I was fortunate enough that I didn't wake up in that moment where I had the emergency. Thankfully, my mother's neurologist was guiding me along the way and just kind of letting me know it's time to start looking. And eventually it was, you need to make sure you have something set up right now, because she reached a point where it's only going to get worse. And so going from facility to facility, I looked at several of them, and majority of them were set up in this assisted living setup. And when I finally started to approach the ones that were memory care, I could see definite differences. But the hard part was whenever I would spend time with my mother, it was almost like, and I hate to say it this way, but it's almost like she was, in my perception, she wasn't faking it, but I felt like there were times that she was aware of what was coming next. And so her abilities were better one day, 1 week, 1 month, better than what they had been previously. And so I kept going back and forth. Oh, maybe assisted living is better for her. Maybe this is that transition. And then there were the moments where I was like, no, it's got to be memory care because she needs, X, Y, and Z. So that's something that, and even still after the fact, in finding locations, seeing her day-to-days and that fluctuation, just as you said, they change day by day. And so it was like some days she can handle things that she can't the next, or that she didn't previously. So for caregivers going into facilities, and as they visit facilities, what do you think are some things that I guess are the checklist items to be aware of or look for potential facilities?
So what I would look for is a personal connection. And now, mind you, there are so many different buildings and communities and facilities that offer so many things. I think it's very important that you find something that you have a personal connection with. And you can usually feel the energy. I think when the staff is really happy, when the residents are really, especially in memory care, because remember, we're dealing with individuals who really can't do a lot for themselves, so they need a lot of prompting. When the staff is super involved, when the staff seems to have a great pantry, and the residents are extremely well kept and they're interacted with. In my community especially, we get a lot of compliments on how our caregivers interact with our residents and how happy our residents are and how well dressed they are and how independent they are, and how even coming here, they're more independent and they've made strides positively in a better direction than they were when they were at home. Like, there seems to be a decline at home and now they're getting better. So those are some things to look for. I would see if there's a community reach out where you can reach out to other family members who have their family members there. I would look for testimonials. Anything that would point you in the direction that there is really good care. Because the thing about memory care is it's extremely difficult, and it can become monotonous and difficult and complacent, and it to a space where people forget that these are still people. And I stress to my staff all the time that we have to remember that there's so much about Alzheimer's and dementia and other forms of dementia that we don't know, that we still have to treat all of our residents like they're still there.
Right.
And that's a big deal, like not talking about them like they're not in the room. And when you do tours, kind of listen out, listen out for how the staff talks to the residents. Listen out to how the staff talks to each other in front of the residents. And also remember, people are going to flush situations. When you walk in, they're going to put on their best behavior. But because you do have a critical eye, because you know what you're looking for, you will be able to point out obvious markers of things that you might think are unsavory. And also how the staff responds to you when you're in the building, because that's a big deal too, right? If they see you and they don't know you and they're protective over the residents, that would be a green light for me too. It always is a red flag for me if I go into a building and the staff is just not even aware that you're there, or not looking at you a specific way, or not in any way trying to be protective, if that makes sense. Like,
absolutely.
When you can just walk through the front, when you walk through the front door and they don't even say hello to you, or ask if they can help you, or if there's someone you're looking for, because we have to protect the people that we take care of. It's really important that's another really important job, is that we protect everyone here, because they can't really protect themselves. I think that's another one that's really important too. And your energy. You usually can feel the energy, right? When you walk in a building, if something's off.
Definitely. And that's something, I'm glad you said that, because when I was looking at different facilities, and one would have an open reception area, and I could walk right in and ask questions and even go further into the facility, where another, more related to the memory care, I had to be... there was a security entrance where I had to be buzzed in. And so in thinking of my mother as, I hated to answer some of the questions because it was a reality check for me. Is she a wanderer? And I've never considered that before, because at home, other than the occasional "I want to go home" comment, I never had the thought of, oh my goodness, what if I went to the restroom one day and I turn around and she's gone because she went out the front door. So that is definitely a very solid point there. So,
and the community is a lot too. They're usually secured communities.
Right.
It's very important in memory care to have a secured community.
Yeah, and that's where I didn't want, because some days my mom would understand the conversation of, the next steps to take and a facility to go to. And it was there's the hesitation, and there was the outright reluctance. And then there was some days there was a little bit of acceptance, but only in the terms of only when I get to this status, or only when this happens, then I will accept that. But it was just, there were items, or there were the moments that they just didn't seem reasonable. I mean, because if you say only if I fall and break my hip will I go, well, there are far more things that could happen well before that. So
yeah, and again, I tell everyone, you have to know your limit. You have to know what you can handle, and you don't want that feeling of guilt where you're just like, oh my gosh, I waited too long. Right. And that's difficult, right? Because you feel the guilt comes from an amalgamation of places. A, I don't want my loved one to feel like I'm throwing them away. B, you took care of me all my life. How could I not take care of you?
Right.
And then there's the flip side where it's, oh my gosh, I know that I'm not giving you everything you need. how can I do that without feeling the guilt of you feeling like I don't care enough to do it? Because the reality is there are some things that are just outside of your pay grade, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think people think that caregiving for a loved one is different than being a caregiver in general. And caregiving is not for everyone. Healthcare is not for everyone, you know? So if you're a lawyer and you chose not to go into healthcare because it's just not for you, what would make you think that because it's your mom, it'd be easier for you? It's not. Being a healthcare worker is a calling. It really is. Like being a caregiver and someone in healthcare and devoting your life to taking care of people is a calling. You have to really want to do it. And if it's not in you, whether it's a loved one or not, eventually it's going to get to a space where it's just above what you're capable of doing.
Right. I definitely experienced that because in earlier years, I would tell myself I could do this and we'll go as long as we can, as far as we can. But there's one thing I have to draw the line in. I didn't want to have to begin having to assist in the bathroom to where I'm having to wipe my own mother. You know, it's one thing when you have your child, and I know she did it for me as a child, but in the reverse, where it's me as an adult having to be in that intimate of a relationship with my mother, that was my drawing the line. And then one day it actually happened. She had some gastrointestinal issues, and I had to get a sample from her. And even though she was able to do that alone, I still had to help her afterwards. And it was that, I guess, was my traumatic moment when I realized, okay, I had no sooner that I had said, well, I say no sooner, I had said it in at least 2 years prior to. And when that happened, it was like, okay, all of a sudden it was that blink of an eye and we're here. And then we're in that moment and, oh no, what now? And so
yeah,
that was, I definitely reached my limit at that point. And trying to push past that limit, it was, the guilt came in because every time something came up that it was even remotely close to that, I'm pushing myself past my limits.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
yeah.
in that respect, you know, and that's where that conversation would come up with my mom as far as, is it time? Is it not? We need to consider this. We don't. We can push it off a little bit longer. Maybe not. What can you say to a loved one that is reluctant to transitioning into that living space from their own home into a facility?
So, the first thing I always tell everyone is, you know, when they're moving into the community, you want to make them a part of the decision as much as possible, depending on their cognitive capabilities. You want to make it seem like less of a punishment and more of a, this is why we're doing this. And I know a lot of families are like, well, they're not going to understand, but that's still, there's a dignity in making them a part of the choice. And if they're reluctant and you know it's something that you have to put your foot down and do, find somewhere that doesn't feel like a jail. I'm really big on memory cares because a lot of assisted living have memory care units in them, and I'm not a fan of the memory care unit because it feels like it feels like a lockdown prison. I think that a memory care should feel like a home. Any community should feel like a home. And I like the fact that that's what actually attracted me to the building that I run, is because it feels like a home. Like it doesn't feel like, oh, this is the assisted living and there's a space over there with the, like, I don't like the way that feels. Right. Well, I don't even like what it implies. I think if you're going to have a memory care, the entire community should be a memory care,
right? Where
everyone feels as though they're home. And I also don't believe in the idea that people in memory care can't leave the building. I think they should have outings. I think they should go out because you want this to feel like a home, like somewhere they live and not somewhere they're forced or punished to be as though something's wrong with them. And that's, I think, the stigmatism that a lot of people have with going into assisted living or going to a senior care community, is that it's a punishment or it's like throwing someone away. When in actuality, it's a really great gift you can give them if you find the right place for them. Because what you're giving them is the opportunity to get the best care and the best quality of life they can have in their end of life journey. And I think if you explain it that way, or if you approach it that way, because if you approach it from a guilt perspective, that energy they can feel. And if you feel guilty and they can feel that energy of guilt, it's almost like you're giving them that. If you feel guilty, it's almost like you feel like you are doing something wrong. If in your heart, you know you're doing what you're supposed to be doing, if you know you're doing something right, if you know that you're giving them the best opportunity they can have to have the best quality of life, then there should be no guilt there. It should not be a guilty process. It should be something that you welcome with open arms and that you're open to.
Right.
I know I've had conversations with a lot of my family members, and I'm like, you have to allow yourself to make this okay with you first. Like, you have to be okay with it first. Like, you have to say, I am doing this. This is a good decision. I'm doing this for them. This is a gift I'm giving them. This is not a punishment. And if your energy feels that way, like you feel like, no, this is going to be great, this is going to be good, then they will feel that. And I tell everyone that I come in contact with that asks me questions, whenever you have a cognitive deficit of any sort, your ability to feel people's energy kind of enhances. So you can tell when the place from which people are doing things. Like, you can tell when someone's caring for you because they really love it or because it's just their job. So I have caregivers that say, oh, so-and-so is not responding to me. Well, let's have a conversation about how you approach the situation. And that's just and I tell people, family members, the same thing. You have to approach this situation confident in that you're doing a good thing, so they won't feel reluctant as well.
True. I think the guilt of having to make that choice, because I tried to make that promise to my mother and say, when the conversation came up years ago and she said, you have to promise me you'll never throw me away, you'll never put me away. I knew then that there was going to be the possibility someday, based off of the way things were even then, and this was probably four or 5 years back now. And so I tried to make somewhat of a promise and say, don't worry, I will keep you out as long as possible. But then I realized by me keeping her out, and it got to that point of her needs not being met with me, then I wasn't really holding true to a promise. You know, depending on where she lived, the promise was more so the care that she was going to receive, not so much where she was going to receive it from. And that was one of the things that guilt kind of settled in with me, because once I did make that decision and we did start to make that transition, it was hard for me not to show that guilt and make it feel like it was a punishment, because there were those times that suddenly her abilities just bounced up and she was capable of doing something. And within the first 6 months, she improved. And so I thought, oh, maybe I made the wrong decision. Maybe I jumped too soon. Maybe I should have waited longer. And then there was another step down. And it was a relief to see that, okay, she was surrounded with the people who were able to care for her and knew exactly what was happening, knew exactly how to respond to it, as opposed to me not really noticing it or not knowing how to respond with it, and taking her through to other doctors trying to figure out what's going on, when the doctors, the cardiologist, would point me elsewhere. And even the neurologist, to an extent, would say, well, there's not much you can do. And in that feeling, in that moment of feeling like there's not much you can do, you just don't feel like the care. I didn't feel like the care that I was able to give her at that point was adequate. So in going in that same thought, when the caregiver finally makes that decision, and they choose their facility and they transition in both together, their loved one, and they have that moment of letting go, which was really difficult for me, the hands off, because now I went from being the 24/7 to now handing her off to someone else. And it really honestly felt like that first day of sending your child to kindergarten, where they tell you, the teachers will tell you, the longer you stay, it's harder on them. That moment of walking away afterwards, it was incredible. I thought it was not going to be a big deal. I went through all of the conversations, reading all through the forms. And when it actually came to that moment of me stepping away, walking away, that created a whole different mindset for me. It wasn't the relief I thought it was going to be at first. So when caregivers come in and they do go through this process, what do you see as their, that consistent fear or that moment where they're still clinging on and hanging on? And how do you help them through that?
The consistent fear that I see, and it's the relinquishment of control. Remember, no one's going to love your mom like you love your mom.
Right.
And while I can promise you that I will care for her, in an essence, like I can promise someone I will care for their mom the way they would. Am I really though? That's what's in the back of your mind. And then it's what if I put my family member here and they're not treated well? Because you hear all the horror stories, right?
Right.
What if my mom hates me, my dad hates me forever because they think I've thrown them away? What if they're lonely? What if they're sad? What if something's happening and I'm not there? Those are the obvious fears. And what I always tell everyone is, the moment you leave for just that 24 hours, just focus on taking care of you. Because here's the thing, most people, like I said before, are caregivers way longer than they should be, correct? Mm-hmm. So focus on you for just a moment. Just focus on you and just trust your instinct in trusting me. That's all. Like, just trust your instinct in trusting me. It's like dropping your kid off at kindergarten for the first time, right? Mm-hmm. You kind of want them to be, you're dreading, oh my gosh, if this kid flips out, it's going to be embarrassing. But then you don't want to be the parent where your kid's like, bye. You're like, wait, what? Because, right? It's like,
right.
It's like,
what does it say about me as a parent?
You get in the car and you're like, oh my gosh, what happens if he cries for me, or if something happens and I'm not there, or I miss something? It's kind of the same basic principle.
Right.
It's that relinquishing of control and saying, you can do this probably better than I can, even though I don't want to admit it, because everything is telling me I should be able to do this. It's allowing yourself to process that this is a great decision, that you're doing something fantastic, the best thing you could be doing for your loved ones, and giving yourself a minute to process your own feelings. Because when you're a caregiver, and I do this as a nurse, I do this as an administrator with my staff, with my families, with my residents, I forget about me a lot because I'm so hyper-focused on taking care of everyone. And when you're a caregiver at home for a loved one, you hear how many times you hear the stories. Oh my gosh, I can't remember the last time or oh my gosh, I can't remember the last time me and my husband. You're so hyper-focused on taking care of your loved one that you forget that it's self-preservation is most important.
Right.
So you have to, I always tell my family, go home, have a glass of wine, decompress, and allow yourself to enjoy your own personal space. And it's in that personal space that you'll start to realize, yeah, I think I did. I think, and the first 24 hours is going to be harder than the next 24 hours. And the next 24 hours is going to be easier than the next. It's always going to get easier every single day. But you have to take it every single day and allow yourself to process everything that you're feeling.
So, and as the days go by, the days become weeks and then months, and holiday seasons come up. So, yeah, you know where I'm going with that.
So we have some residents that I would welcome going home with their families for holidays, if the families can do it. And I have some residents that I wouldn't, because the transition back to the building, back to the community is going to be very difficult for them. And usually the residents that are more with it, that come back fine. I'm going to go home. I'm going to go home. And some of them that are not, that are a little farther in the decline of the dementia, you find that when they go, they come back, they have behaviors, they're depressed, they're exit seeking. I think it's a conversation you have to have with your providers, because they are frontline and they deal with your loved one every day, and they know whether or not they're capable or what their behaviors might be. And a conversation you need to have with yourself and your family. I told you I don't believe in the stigmatism that once you're in memory care, you're behind locked doors. I don't think that's to be true. I think you should enjoy the same life as everyone else. I just think you need a different level of assistance in life. That's all. But if you do make the decision, you know what? Last Christmas with Mom was really hard. Last Christmas with Dad was really difficult. We just want to have a great Christmas. And not saying that them being there is not going to make it great, but it's going to make it harder. And this year, I just want my kids and the rest of the family to have a break. You come, you visit, you love on them, and you go home. There is no guilt. There should be no guilt in doing what you need to do for you and your family, because that's what your parents would want you to do. As a parent, you wouldn't want your son or your daughter dreading Christmas because of you, and because of something that's outside of your control. Remember, we're not punishing your loved one. And when you're not angry or resentful or hurt or stressed out by your mom or your dad, it's the disease.
Right.
And as soon as you look at the disease as a problem and not your loved one as a problem, then it won't feel so bad for you to say, I just don't want to deal with the disease right now. Not that I don't want to deal with my mom. I just can't deal with the disease right now. And that's okay. Because you're not punishing them because it's outside of their control, but it's just you have the right to make that choice. To say, this disease is hard and it's a lot. And for a moment, I can't deal with the disease. I'm going to share something with you.
Sure.
My mom had cancer for 11 years. She went in and out of remission twice. Cancer is really hard. It's almost as difficult as dementia. It's very difficult because it's so unpredictable, right?
Yeah.
When she came out of remission the last time, I remember we knew it was going to be bad. And I remember my dad being like, you need to come home. And I waited like a month to come home. And I remember saying that. I thought that I don't want to see my mom. I don't want to see the cancer. Like, I just can't do this right now. Like, it's too much for me to deal with this again. And when I said that to my dad, at first he was so angry. And I was like, you need to hear what I'm saying to you. Like, it's not that I don't want to see Mom and I don't want to love on her. And I don't want to come back and help take care of her, because my mom was at home on hospice. She never went anywhere. She was at home on hospice. So for me, this is a lot. Like, I have to take care of her. I just want to sit back and love my mom in my brain and not have to deal with this disease. And once I started to get my dad to understand that, he started to understand me and why I made the decisions I made better. That it wasn't I didn't want to see my mom, I don't want to take care of her. I just don't want to deal with the disease right now, because it's the disease that's hurting me. It's the disease that's stressing me out. It's the disease itself that's a lot. And I think when you start to look at it like that, you start to separate it and you're able to treat it differently. Do you know what I mean?
Oh, definitely. It's something that I understand that now, because when I finally having that moment of separation, having her in a different space, I was able to see her in a different way and see the disease, not just mom that she used to be versus mom that she is now. I was able to see that difference of the disease. But that's something that once I made that connection, I was finally able to make more decisions on an objective basis, not in an emotional basis. But that didn't stop my family from having their own difficulties, because we all see it. Just like you had your moment and your reaction, each of my siblings had their own personal reactions, and there's nothing I could do to force them to understand or encourage them to see it my way. It just, we all have that moment of, this is what it means to me and this is what it feels like to me. And so after having my dad pass away just 3 years prior, and now this happening with my mom, it just still felt like the timing was still too close. And it was that panic, I'm sure, for me and my siblings of, oh no, we're about to lose another parent. And, not being able to come forward and care in a certain way, just because that emotional, I don't want to call it a detachment, but that emotional awareness of, this may be the last time I see my loved one. And that's, you have someone that you can see whenever versus someone you eventually just see on an occasional basis. And each time you see them and they're different and the disease continually changes them, it makes it harder to go back and see them time and time again. So I understand that. I also
think of siblings, I tell people all the time, you have to allow people to have their own life experience, with perception as reality. And I know a lot of siblings, there's that one sister, she can't deal with the fact that mom, and maybe she can. It doesn't mean that she's wrong and you're right. It just means she's processing it in a different way and she's not ready. Mm-hmm. And I think that's in order to, and also, especially when you're the primary sibling that's doing everything, do not allow someone else's behaviors or how they feel to change how you feel about the decision you're making. No one, this decision is very personal, and don't allow someone else's emotions to guide your decision and what you're doing for your loved one. Another really funny story. So my grandmother, she's since passed, but we were telling my aunt, she's the oldest, and we were like, listen, grandma has dementia. No, she doesn't. She's just, no, I'm almost positive she has dementia. Everybody is saying this to my aunt. She's just like, nope, I don't know what you're talking about. I told her she's fine. I'm like, no, grandma's, I'm telling you I do this for a living. Well, you're just looking for stuff. Then I get a phone call, literally almost 1 o'clock in the morning. My aunt is hysterical crying, oh my God, you're right. I'm like, what happened? Well, I'm African-American. I told my grandmother. So one day my grandmother calls my aunt and she says, my walker is missing. My aunt goes, okay, so what's going on? That girl took my walker. That colored girl took my walker. Oh my aunt goes, I'm sorry. Mom, what did you say? And she said, those people steal, right? So my aunt goes, what do you mean? She goes, the colored girl. So she asked her, what color are you exactly? And my grandma goes, you don't get to ask me that. And I was like, so now we're on the same page? And she's like, she doesn't even know who she is. I'm like, no, she doesn't even know who she is anymore. Like literally, my grandmother had separated herself from herself. And I felt bad that it had to be that jolting for my aunt, but I was like, we've been telling you for like a year that she doesn't. And it literally did get to a space where she thought she was a whole different person in her dementia.
Wow.
She went from taking care of herself at home, my grandmother, to now being a whole different person in her mind, and never came back. And I kept saying to myself, yeah, it was part of us was just like, we should have just forced the issue and maybe things would have been different. Maybe we would have been able to do something, anything. And so at some point you have to be okay with taking the reins and saying, nope, this is the great decision. This is what we need to do. This is what we need to do so she can have a great quality of life. And again, that was that story. And then one day it just went from 0 to 100. And you're like, how did I miss this? Pay attention to the signs and be okay noticing the signs, Don't think that you're making things up in your head. Don't let anybody tell you that you're moving too fast. Be okay with your decision, because this is not a punishment. It's not. I mean, for me, if ever I end up in a space where I have it, I hope my family makes this decision sooner than later. I do. Because if you find the right fit, it can be a great, great, great help. And they do. They thrive. Because they have people who know what they're doing, and they care for them, and they have that personal one-on-one care. And also remember, you go back to being able to love on your mom and your dad again. How awesome is that? So you're caretaking, you're just taking care of the disease every single day. And when you look at your parent, that's all you see is the dementia, is the Alzheimer's, is the disease. But how awesome is it to come and visit your parent or your loved one and see your mom again, see your dad again? You know what I mean? As opposed to seeing them and being like, oh, yeah.
Yeah, it's a different thing. When I visit mom now, I'm visiting mom. I see her smile. I can hug and kiss on her. I can see the woman that I wanted to see before, when before it was just, like you said, caring for the disease. But the interesting thing about it is that's, me and mom together. But what happens when it's a spouse? When that husband or wife has to actually transition their spouse? How does that work for assisted living?
Well, it's usually, if I'm honest, harder for men than it is for women. It's very hard for husbands to bring their wives to the community and relinquish that control. Because but when they finally do, here's the flip side. So it's really difficult for men to make the decision to put their spouse here. Once they do, there's a period of relief, and then there's a period of absolute, I have to control everything. The opposite is for women. Women usually make this decision, yes, today, let's do it. They have this period of like, oh my God, I made the worst decision in the world. Why have I done this? What have I done? And then they go back to, okay, this was a good decision. Does that make sense? It's like a teeter-tottering back and forth in opposite directions. Men are very much like, no, I can't do this. I'm not doing this. It takes them months and months and months. They finally do it. They feel better for a period of time. And then there is this crazy control that has to happen. And women are the opposite. They're like, let's put him away. I got to do it. I can't do it anymore. Let's find somewhere for him to get better care. And then they're like panic mode for months. Like, oh my gosh. And then there's like this calm.
That's kind of what I went through. I can see that.
Yeah, like there's like this calm. Like, but every time I have a conversation with a spouse that's had their loved one here for a while, they always talk about the decision-making process. And I think for a child and a parent, it's the decision-making process is way harder than it is for a spouse. Because usually a spouse is of the same age. Mm-hmm. They probably have a lot of the same ailments. They have family pushing them. No, mom, dad's getting up there. You really need to, you can, and we need you. They have family pushing them. Mm-hmm. But with a child, it's, I'm young. I should be able to do this. All my family is looking down on me. It's the opposite, right? Mm-hmm. Like for a spouse, the children are like, come on, Dad, you can't deal with this anymore. Come on, let's make this decision. Come on, Dad, you can't. But for a parent, you call your aunt and you're like, hey, your mom's sister, you're like, I'm going to have to find a community. She's like, what are you, like, there's such a backlash you feel.
Right.
And you see that all the time. So I tell people, that's the only difference that I see in between spousal and parental relinquishment of control of caregiving. It really is, you get more support from your family as a spouse than you do as a child, which is weird to me, right? But mm-hmm. It's true. You'll see it. You'll see like cousins and aunts and be like, oh, I told Bob he should have put Mary in a community years ago. He can't deal with this. But then Mary wants to put her dad in, and they're like, what do you mean you're doing this? This is the worst thing you could ever do. That's your dad. He took care of you. It's kind of weird. Yeah. But that's the dynamic that I see. It's frowned upon when you're doing it for your parent, but it's welcomed and it's supported when you're doing it for yourself.
That's interesting. I guess
like you decided made the decision to put your mom away. Had this been your dad making that decision, probably all of your siblings in your family would have been like, yeah, do it. This is really hard for you. You can't take care of this anymore. There's no way. But when you did it, you probably got like an amalgamation of criticism.
That's so true.
And that's what I see. And it's true.
I think that's the cultural assumption that we're supposed to, our parents took care of us, so therefore we have to take care of them. And it was true for the most part for my dad, but he had passed away from pneumonia. He didn't have dementia. He didn't have cancer or, anything else that he would have needed the 24-hour care. And so being with him, we did get the time to spend with him in the hospital. It was like 3 weeks before he did pass. But that transition, like you said, if it was us saying, come on, Mom, you need to let Dad be in a facility, or vice versa, it would have been us encouraging him or her to let the other one go, versus us being, and I hate to say it this way, but us being forced to care for our parents, because that's the cultural idea is that generations take care of their own generations. And I've even heard that comment made before, and speaking with someone else, their comment was, we don't do that, meaning we don't put our loved ones in facilities. We keep them home with us regardless. And I thought, I don't know how you do that. And I know there's services where you can have, home health care and so far. But even with that, it can only go so far before you absolutely have to look at the professional caregiving in a facility.
Absolutely.
So
I agree.
It's interesting. And that's the thing, especially now in COVID times. This has changed so much, and it is hard that the people who do have their loved ones in facilities or nursing homes anywhere around the country, and they're not able to go in right now. It is hard emotionally, yes, but they are still getting taken care of, and they are still getting the care that they wouldn't be getting at home, because in that moment of panic, oh no, should I go and take her out and bring her back home with me? But then I realized nothing has changed aside of COVID, because the same factors of why she needed to be there were still there. Nothing had changed. So me bringing her back home, I still would have been, even more so now, well beyond my limits of being able to care for her. It's this back and forth thing. And one of the processes going through this mentally of, like you said, letting go of the control, which is still somewhat hard to do. But as time goes by, it gets easier and easier, because I do trust the system. I do trust the process. I do trust the facility. I trust the staff, and I see it on her face. And so that feels incredibly relieving, and that sense of peace comes in, and I don't worry about whatever anyone else thinks outside of the family, just that Mom's getting the care she needs, and she's living a better quality of life than she was before. And so that's one of the things I have learned. Know your limitations, and don't forget about you. This whole thing about self-care, I don't think, we hear it, but we don't know what it looks like. And in this case, by giving Mom the gift, I'm also giving myself a gift of self-care.
And I have a self-care conversation with my staff a lot, especially as women. We have the worst self-care. We don't take care of ourselves the way we should. Everyone comes before us. We're usually number 6 or 7 on the list,
right?
Unfortunately. And I tell everyone that, self-care is a really big deal, because if you're not 100% of yourself, how could you give anyone any, like, it's like having a pitcher full of water and you're just pouring water out of the pitcher. Eventually it's going to be empty. And if you're not putting anything back in, you don't have anything to pour out.
Exactly.
There has to be a balance. There has to be some sort of balance between how well you take care of yourself and how well you take care of everybody else.
That is absolutely true. And I think that's where my pitcher became empty, and the only thing that was filling it up was resentment.
Yes. Oh, there's definite resentment. There's definitely a resentment. There 100%. And it's not resentment against them. It's resentment against the disease.
Right.
So that's all you see. You're not seeing your mom or your dad anymore.
Right.
You're seeing the dementia. You're not even seeing them anymore. You're seeing dementia, and it's resentful, and it's hurtful, and it's hard, and it's a process that you have to be able to process on your own. Like, think about it. This is this human being who's nurtured you and took care of you your whole life, and they can barely take care of themselves. Watching that is really difficult.
It is.
And not allowing yourself a moment to process how the disease is affecting you as much as it's affecting them is not okay.
This has been wonderful. I thank you for taking the time with me, Ramona. I wanted to answer some of the questions that I've been seeing from caregivers. And I also want to encourage caregivers to continue to reach out and ask those questions that they don't have the answers for, whether it's emotional or otherwise. Ramona, you have been a wonderful guest. I'm so glad you were able to take the time. I wanted our caregivers to be able to get an insight on assisted living, as whether it's COVID times or otherwise, post-COVID. We've seen the we're living it. And once we get to the flip side of all of this, we're still the need is still gonna be there. And as they venture out and go look in search for their facilities, I hope they have some food for thought to take with them. So I appreciate you taking the time.
No, thank you. I hope I answered your questions and I was informative. I hope that they got something from it.
Well, you did. And if I'm sure more will come up, and I will know where to find you now.
Of course. Anytime.
It was nice meeting you. It was great talking to you. Take care.
All right. Take care.
And there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. I hope this provided much food for thought. If you are trying to determine whether or not it's time, it probably is. And as Ramona helped point out, know your limitations. Don't forget about yourself. And one thing I even learned today while speaking with Ramona, as you transition your loved one into this new way of living, it's not a facility. It's a community. We are all transitioning together into a new type of community. Keep that in mind. Take care until next time.
Thank you for joining us today. We really hope you've enjoyed this episode. To learn more about proactive caregiving and to hear other episodes of this podcast, please visit www.jessicalizelcannon.com. This podcast is produced by Cannon Light Media, LLC, www.cannonlightmedia.com. Music provided by Khris Paradise.